Have you been worried about the age verification tsunami that is gripping the internet right now? Do you think that this whole debacle has more to do with freedom of expression and surveillance? If your answer is resembling yes to either of those questions, thank you. I, for one, am relieved. Now, you might be looking at my response with a bit of confusion. Well, this is because I've been warning about these issues since at least 2022. Believe me, people's reactions to my warnings were much different than what they are today. I'm Drew Wilson from Freezenet, and this is my warning today about these so-called age verification schemes being pushed by governments around the world. I know what some of you are thinking. I'm going to say something like, to get a better understanding of this, we have to go to the very beginning. Then you are going to reach for your mouse and start looking at the scrub bar as you mouse over the preview images because you want to know what the payoff is without some long-winded, boring explanation. Well, allow me to save you a step by telling you what the payoff is now. Age verification laws are simply the government stepping into the regulation of legally protected speech. Okay, we cool? Cool. Now, let me explain the context of why this matters for where age verification laws are going. Trust me, there are a lot of ugly directions in which these laws can go. Indeed, with other laws, such as the DMCA for instance, it was about the government intervening in content that technically is not legally protected speech. In that example, the content being copyright infringement. Obviously, the practicality of enforcement of that is a different matter, but that is its own ball of wax. Where age verification differs from that other example is that the government is directly blocking access to legally protected speech. When age verification laws first started coming about, a number of these laws contained a provision that says that a certain percentage of content on a given web service must be identified as adult content. Whether that percentage is 30%, 40%, or 60%, a number was generally given. The reason for this is to pretend to make it clear. These laws are not about regulating the entire internet and all the speech that is on it, but rather regulating websites that deal with what some term explicit content. This is a part of why, for a while, digital rights advocates and observers were reporting on Pornhub blocking various states and countries for the simple reason that they were the biggest website that was targeted by these laws, though not the only one. Wiser web owners and digital rights advocates have noted that adult content can often be the canary in the coal mine when it comes to the freedom of expression. That observation held very true in this case. To be clear, adult content, save for the obvious exceptions, is legally protected speech. If adult content can be targeted because of an erosion of the legal protections of speech, any speech can be targeted. As time went on, various age verification laws started evolving their language. As a result, the facade that this was about stopping children from viewing adult content began to slip. Instead of the law applying to just obvious adult websites, the various bills floating around gradually dropped language targeting adult websites and started including any large platforms or websites that could theoretically contain explicit content. An example of this would be Canada's defunct Bill S-210, which got resurrected as Bill S-29 in the current government. Other laws even took things a step further and became less about explicit content and instead incorporated an umbrella of types of content that were loosely defined. For instance, the UK's Online Safety Act also includes content that can be deemed harmful to children, not just explicit content. With scopes expanding, some of these laws, like the UK's Online Safety Act, tragically became the law of the land, laying enforcement tasks at the feet of the country's regulators. In the UK example, this wound up being Ofcom. Now, it would take some time for these laws to be enforced, so few outside of the world of digital rights even noticed a difference. That, however, changed as enforcement became a thing. That is when most started noticing the age gating cropping up on sites like Blue Sky, Reddit, Xbox, Steam, Rockstar, and YouTube earlier this year. I should point out that there are a few that actually stood up and fought these terrible laws. Wikipedia, for instance, lodged a complaint against these laws in a bid to protect their users. While they did lose the fight with only the ability to challenge the classification afterwards, they at least did something about this, which is praiseworthy in my view. Two other sites fighting these laws were well-known troll websites 4chan and Kiwi Farms, which rightfully pointed out that they are US-based websites and not subject to UK law. Therefore, they are not obliged to implement age verification, nor are they obliged to pay the daily fines that Ofcom imposed on them. I'm not really a fan of either of these sites, but let's face it, while the two sites may be downright vile, they are not wrong as far as I can tell in this case. This is when people really began to notice just how far these laws were really going. Websites that were considered large were first hit, with the smaller websites soon following suit. The outrage that all this sparked was highly validating for me personally, because I spent years raising the alarm about all this, only to be dismissed by a number of people as crazy or freaking out about a scenario that couldn't possibly happen. Now, the nightmare scenario I warned about was actually playing out, and many others found themselves making the very same criticisms that I've been making for years now. These criticisms include the fact that users were simply going to use websites that didn't comply with age verification laws, which has been repeatedly shown to be the case. A second criticism is that these age verification systems neither respect people's privacy nor are highly accurate as the laws demanded. Studies have repeatedly shown that this is an accurate assessment. A third criticism is that these third-party age verification companies are vulnerable to leaks and hacks. This has happened not once, not twice, but at least 3 times now. A fourth criticism is that the age verification systems are easily circumvented. Thanks to VPNs, video game characters, and fake IDs, this has held true. For those that say that artificial intelligence is going to fix all that, sorry, but AI is not going to save you here, as studies have shown that they are highly inaccurate and are increasingly inaccurate the closer to the age target you get. A fifth criticism is that as you start censoring more and more legally protected speech under the fake protect the children drumbeat, more and more additional speech is going to be getting censored in the process. This has already played out with Reddit censoring political speech and mental health support groups, among other things. Even worse, Australia, for their part, has been pushing to put a blanket age verification requirement on social media with the recent push to include YouTube. This is regardless of the content that happens to be on these platforms. States like California are moving to implement age verification directly into app stores. Australia is also moving to expand age verification to include AI chatbots over content that could possibly be produced by them. Even worse, some are pushing to further expand the UK laws to go straight to full-blown content removal by disabling access to content for all ages, not just those who are deemed to be underage. A sixth criticism is that age verification companies are going to find themselves uniquely positioned to collect vast troves of personal information. Since personal information is highly sought after by for-profit companies such as shady data brokers, it would be far too tempting to pretend that they don't collect personal information, but quietly start collecting personal information on users with the possibility of selling that at some point later on. That came at least partly true when AgeGo, an age verification company that claimed to be a double-blind age verification system, was recently busted collecting information on what URLs users were visiting. Now, there is no evidence to suggest that the personal information was ever sold, but the real question here is, why would such a company collect this kind of information in the first place? Honestly, I can't think of an actual alternative reason why a company would track the individual URLs of what users were visiting. Seriously, why else would they do so if they aren't trying to profile their users? Every single thing that I had warned about has basically come true. It isn't just theoretical or hypothetical, it has actually happened in one form or another. And every one of these warnings were denied by those pushing the technology, the laws, or both. So the question becomes this: where do things go to from here? Simply put, there are a number of possibilities, but almost every single one of them that I'm aware of makes the situation worse than what you are already seeing today. One of the most likely possibility is that smaller websites are going to become subject to this free speech crackdown. Since larger websites folded, smaller, less well-resourced websites are going to have a significantly harder time fighting against all of this. With age verification, anything can be charged, so smaller websites are probably going to be asked to fork over huge sums of money to these government-approved companies, or simply fold altogether to avoid multi-million-dollar fines. In fact, while I was writing the script, that too has already started happening. Another likely possibility is that government is going to look at how faulty the current slate of technology is. And yes, governments are already well aware of how badly flawed these technical deployments already are. In response, they could start ramping up requirements. For instance, some governments might require multiple forms of ID. Others might require the use of your social security, social insurance number, or equivalent ID to better track your movements online. Some governments might even demand that personal information get retained by the government to better track what you are visiting on the web to supposedly ensure that it is you and not someone else. Another possibility is that the government would start cracking down on anonymous tools like VPNs and Tor. In fact, the UK government is already mulling the idea of targeting such services. Another possible outcome is that governments will start exploring the possibility of blocking websites outright and keeping a whitelist of government-approved websites and services. This would severely limit what websites you can visit entirely. There has already been chatter of this possibility with respect to the UK government and 4chan. We could also see a major expansion of what kinds of content that are subject to age verification. Already, there are those who believe that video games in general are harmful to children and believe that children should not have access to games at all. In the US, there are already hearings against companies like Reddit and Valve by right-wing politicians seeking to have them answer for their role in supposed radicalization as they falsely pin things like games to things like the Charlie Kirk killing. That's just two possible ways these laws could theoretically expand. It all boils down to governments around the world being given the green light to crack down on legally protected speech. Let's face it, we are already well past pretending that this has anything to do with preventing children from stumbling across explicit content on the web. That ship has sailed a long time ago. This is about the government taking advantage of a moral panic and obtaining unprecedented amounts of control over what you can and cannot see online. This while increasingly getting better tools to monitor your every movement online. With large platforms already bending at the knee and few resisting these things, the government is going to keep getting more and more power until they run into sufficient resistance. So far, that hasn't happened. So expect things to get a heck of a lot worse as time moves forward. After all, when it comes to what the government can censor online these days, the sky is truly the limit. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support this journalistic effort, you can support this effort by liking and subscribing or by checking out my website directly at freezenet.ca. Also, you can support this effort by subscribing to our Patreon at patreon.com/freezenet or passing along a one-time tip at coffee.com/freezenet. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.